Hello friends, welcome to Monday morning satsang. We're just a few moments late. I accidentally broadcast into my personal YouTube channel. Anyway, I hope you join this either live or in the recording. Let's begin with a prayer, feeling the presence and the blessings of the Masters. Let's pray together. Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, Friend, beloved God, great masters of self-realization, Jesus Christ, Babaji Krishna, Lahiri Mahashaya, Swami Shriyateshwar, beloved Paramhansa Yogananda, friend and guide, Swami Kriyananda, saints of all religions, all paths, we lovingly bow at all of your feet. Beloved Master, infuse us with your spirit. Uplift us in your light. Help us to be deeply in tune with thee. If we are disciples, bless us that we deepen our discipleship through the study of this book, The New Path, through tuning in to all you have to share with us. Strengthen us for our tests. Help us to know your will and to live it. We will act reason and will, but guide thou our reason, activity and will, that it be the right thing, that we do the right thing in everything. Om, peace. Amen. Well, apologies for the late start there. That was totally my fault. Anyway, I'm not going to dwell on it. I made a mistake with the broadcasting. We were going to do some music, but we started a little late, so we're going to go straight into the text. We're in chapter 17, Mount Washington Estates. This is our third go at it. We're on page 174. Master has just manifested through deep prayer and activity the $45,000 that were needed to buy Mount Washington Estates. So I'll read this on. I don't know whether we'll finish the chapter, but here we go. So I'll just read the last line that we finished on last week. Minutes later, Miss Trask arrived. The drama was over. We paid the full purchase price, and Mount Washington was ours. Thus was founded the international headquarters of Self-Realization Fellowship, the institution through which Paramhansa Yogananda disseminated his yoga teachings throughout the world. When I came to the Master in 1948, Mount Washington Estates was a monastery. At first, however, he planned to make it a how-to-live school, similar to his well-known institution in India, because his hopes for spiritualizing the West included an all-round education for the young. He soon realized, however, that his educational dreams for this country would have to wait until enough grown-ups were converted to his ideals. Only then could there be properly trained teachers and enough parents willing to send their children to his schools. Soon, therefore, Mount Washington became a residential center for adults desirous of devoting their lives to God. In 1925, though many Americans derived inspiration from Yogananda's message, relatively few were ready to give their entire lives to the spiritual search. Even in India, so Lord Krishna stated in the Bhagavad Gita, out of 1,000, one seeks me, and out of 1,000 who seek, one fully knows me. Swami Shankaracharya, also known simply as Swami Shankara, Acharya means teacher, once remarked, childhood is busy with playthings, youth is busy with romance and family, old age is busy with sickness and worries. Where is the man who is busy with God? Here, in the materialistic West, few indeed were willing to spare the time for deep meditation. By ones they came, many left, few remained. Yogananda might have compromised his high standards and made it easier for many more to stay, but he never would do so. And by ones they did come, among whom were a growing number of deeply seeking souls. Slowly a monastic order developed, in time to achieve such a high spiritual caliber as I have seen nowhere else, not even in India. For some years, Swami Yogananda continued to tour the country, lecturing, teaching, and attracting to his work a gradually growing band of dedicated disciples. At least he felt guided by God to end his spiritual campaigns, as he called them, and return to Mount Washington to devote his time to training the souls he had sent there. There now began for him and his little band a period of severe testing. During his previous years of public teaching, all the money he had sent home had, as things turned out, been spent, often not wisely. No doubt those in charge had imagined the supply would never run out. To replenish the depleted bank account, the master might have gone out campaigning again. But he felt that God now wanted him at Mount Washington, and he obeyed the divine summons unflinchingly. He and his little group planted tomatoes on the hillside. For months, their diet consisted of raw tomatoes, stewed tomatoes, fried tomatoes, baked tomatoes, tomato soup. They found that with a little culinary imagination, even this drastically limited fare could be pleasantly varied. With the passing years, more and more students around the country realized that what the master had brought them was far more than an adjunct to the church teachings with which they had grown up. It was a complete spiritual path in itself. He always encouraged his students to remain loyal to their own churches, if they so desired. Increasing numbers of them, however, as they practiced his teachings, began to feel that his work was all the church they needed. Thus his work developed, not by missionary tactics of conversion, but by his students' own personal experience of the efficacy of his teachings. More and more, those whose worldly responsibilities prevented them from entering his monastery began to unite together in their own towns to form self-realization fellowship centers. Lessons were compiled at Mount Washington from his teachings and writings and sent to devoted students around the country, eventually reaching students throughout the world. By 1935, the work was firmly established and flourishing. This was the year that Yogananda's guru, Swami Kriyananda, summoned him back to India. The now famous disciple spent a year there, traveling about the country, addressing large audiences. A visitor to Sri Yukteswar's Serampore ashram compared Swami Yogananda one day to a certain other well-known Swami, famous in both India and America. The great guru, though rarely one to bestow even the mildest praise, replied now with quiet pride, "Don't mention them in the same breath. Yogananda is much greater." Swami Yogananda, during his campaign days, had sometimes asked his audience to clasp their hands together. Then he'd tell them, "Those who are in tune with me will not be able to separate their hands until I tell them they are free." When he returned to India, he performed his demonstrations sometimes just to show the power of the mind. When I went to India in 1958, someone who had been there told me that one evening, Motilal Thakkar, an advanced disciple of Sri Yukteswar, had gone around the hall, blowing on the tips of his fingers, then flicking them toward people in an attempt to release them from Yogananda's power. He failed to break the Swami's spiritual influence. During that year, Sri Yukteswar bestowed on his disciple the highest of Indian spiritual titles, Paramhansa. It was hoped by many Indians that Yogananda would remain in India now, but God was already inwardly calling him back to America. His guru death was a further outward sign that God was releasing him to go back. Accordingly, in 1936, he returned to Mount Washington, and now a new phase of his mission began. In conjunction with his early visions at Mount Washington, Yogananda had always seen two other buildings. The first was the main hall of his Ranchi school. The other had yet to be brought into outward manifestation. It was a beautiful hermitage somewhere by the sea. Several times while driving down to California coast, to San Diego, he had felt attracted to a certain spot in the little town of Encinitas. Each time that the attraction had awakened in him, he received the inner message. Wait not yet. Obedient to his inner guidance, he had never pursued the matter further. After his return from India, however, a surprise awaited him. On the very spot that had interested him on those drives, James J. Lynn, a wealthy disciple and highly advanced spiritually, had purchased and built for him the hermitage of his visions. Here it was that Paramhansaji, as many people now began calling him, over the next several years spent most of his time writing books, among them his spiritual classic, Autobiography of a Yogi. His days now were an idyll of divine tranquility. After years of traveling, spiritual campaigning, and courageously meeting a never-ending series of challenges to his mission, he was able to enjoy for a short time of the fruits of his labor. The challenges he met now were in the more congenial realm of spiritual ideas. In order to share this idyll with devoted students, he constructed a small, beautiful place of worship in 1938 on the grounds in Encinitas, the Golden Lotus Temple. He named this new building, situated in the garden, fairly close to the main hermitage. It overlooked the Pacific Ocean. Here the master led group meditations with the ocean backdrop as a visible reminder of the vastness of spirit. He shared with devotees some of the deep inspirations that were pouring daily through his pen. The Golden Lotus Temple attracted widespread public interest. Visitors sometimes compared it to the Taj Mahal. One person said of it, "It is like seeing paradise without dying." But the master's idyll didn't last long. In 1939, World War II started in Europe. Its disruptive vibrations could not but affect the tranquility of a work as attuned as Yogananda's was to serving the needs of mankind everywhere. In 1942, not long after America's entry into the war, the Golden Lotus Temple slipped into the sea. Its foundations had been undermined by soil erosion caused by water seepage from the road outside the hermitage property. The loss of this famous structure received front-page Associated Press coverage in hundreds of newspapers across the nation. To Paramhansaji, however, the loss was not a tragedy, but a sign of God's will. The time had come for the next stage in his mission. God's true lovers seem to attract more than their share of trials. Perhaps the reason is to give the rest of us a lesson from their example, that adversity, if met with divine faith, proves invariably a blessing in the end. Hardship is but a shortcut, tunneled, so to speak, through mountains so as to the more quickly to reach the fertile meadows beyond them. Paramhansa Ji declared that from the destruction of his golden lotus temple, many other places of worship would arise. To him then, its loss meant that the time had come to expand his work, reaching out more actively to the world through the medium of his organization, which by this time was firmly established. And we're going to stop there. And thankfully, next week, when I come to this next spot, the next paragraph, that is where on my audio that Swami starts reading again. I've lost that first whole, right up until this point, I've lost on my audio of Swami's reading this chapter. So thankfully, next week, Swami will be reading to us once again, and I thank you for bearing with me with regards to that. So we continue on with Mount Washington Estates. We continue on seeing the breadth and depth of Paramhansa Yogananda as a dynamic spiritual leader, teacher, seeker, guru, master, and also as the organization is formed and he begins to take the work out. There are, of course, always many things that we could focus on during this chapter, as there always will be with each class. So I'm just going to pull a couple of things out. I actually made a note of one of the points while I was reading, because it was right where I was around it. The two things that I really wanted, very briefly, I wanted to just mention that Yogananda never compromised his standards. And oftentimes it comes up within the world of Ananda that we kind of, make the teachings not more accessible, we kind of water them down. And this is why we don't, because Master himself never did. It was holding the thread up high so that people would have to rise to it. And albeit that a smaller number may come, but it would be a very important point that these people would be deep, dedicated disciples and devotees. Now, that doesn't mean that we can't always be looking at ways to reach out further and to people at all levels from that core and that high thread. But it's just very interesting to note that Master had that strong ideal, and we can see why we have it here at Ananda. And also that the monastic order was to achieve such a high spiritual caliber as I have seen nowhere else, not even in India. This is Swami commenting on that, who has been in India and has been around it. And I know that other disciples that were with Master have also commented on how such a high caliber of the people coming out of Master's ashram, out of the monasteries there, because in India, where you would think that they had the highest, it was known from various different people, not people just within the organization, but people that had experienced the monasteries in India and come to self-realization fellowship, just were astounded by the level of commitment and depth by the monks and nuns within the self-realization fellowship monasteries. So, and now in Ananda we continue on. Our dear friend Swami Devashi is heading the worldwide monastery movement in India and really diving very deeply into what Swami had said would be hundreds of divine warriors in India. And of course, here in the States as well. So just the other points that I really wanted to pick up on were just two points. It was that Yogananda would always follow his calling from the divine. So he felt that shift, that he'd been doing his spiritual campaigns, that God was calling him inward now. He had reached out. And then also that when the Golden Lotus Temple falls into the ocean, he feels that it is a blessing. Even though here it is, front page news across the country, not just in Los Angeles, across the country. And yet he is so deeply, he's not concerned by these things of what newspapers say, of what, other people are saying. He is interested in what God is saying. And God is saying to him that now the work has to change again. And he once again starts to reach out with his organization and builds other temples. And we'll discover more about that next week. But these 2 points, he was always tuning in to God's will. And at a moment's notice, he would follow the will of God. Doesn't mean sometimes he wouldn't tussle with God when certain things were happening. We were talking about the tussling with God around finding money. But when he knew that God wanted him to do something, immediately it was yes, sir. And he just followed that. He might still tune in, just like he did when he was tested, when he had the dream to move to America. He might pray very deeply to God to clarify it, but he moved quickly once he knew that. And so it's I think for each of us is just to look at what is God calling us to do. Let's just close the eyes and just really sit with that for the moment and just see, what is God calling you to do? That maybe life's circumstances or friends or family or even Guru Bhais may think that there may be objection to, or maybe the objection is more within yourself than other people and outside. But what are you being called to do by God right now? What is God asking you to do? And just connecting with Yogananda, connecting with the divine in that form that is inspiring and deep to you today. Asking to know God's will for you, for your service. Asking for help clarifying that. Asking for the divine to be very clear with you, to send you signs and confirmations through people and outer circumstances, as well as that inner call as well. And just inwardly make this week an opportunity to tune into God's will more deeply. Okay. The point that I made a note of when I was reading it just now, because I had highlighted obedient to his inner guidance when he was looking in Encinitas. He was looking in Encinitas he was driving through it, and he knew that there was some sort of spot. There was another vision that he'd had in India of a third location, and Encinitas was it. And the inner message was wait, not yet. But what I kind of made the note of was Several times while driving down the California coast to San Diego, he had felt attracted to a certain spot in the little town of Encinitas. Each time the attraction had awakened in him, he had received the inner message. Each time that the attraction had awakened in him, he had received the inner message. Wait, no, not yet. Obedient to his inner guidance, he pursued the matter no further. But very interesting that he had felt this attraction to this particular spot. And the reason I kind of made a note of it while I was reading it, and I hadn't made a note of that before when I had been making notes, was just, isn't it interesting when we have some sort, not obviously a lower attraction, but a higher expanded attraction to something. Maybe it is to a particular calling that we are being drawn to, maybe, you know, some sort of idea that you have. There's this kind of, there's an attraction to it. So it's just, I thought to make a note of it, because when we're trying to tune into God's will, here is another indicator. Feeling an attraction, we know also feeling an uplifted calmness. These are things that help us to tune into when we know that God is speaking to us. You know, for me, as many of you know, I keep sharing about it. My real passion at this time is Whispers from Eternity. And that is something that I feel God and Master calling me to. I don't know where that's going to lead. I didn't know in the beginning of how that would transpire, how that would unfold. And it's still very much unfolding for me. But I just felt it. I felt deeply to follow the call to pick up Whispers. Must have been a year ago now, and to read the introduction was my inner guidance, and to dive deeply into Whispers, which I did. Then as I started to work with it much more deeply, I felt to share it in different ways. I shared it in the virtual community with Online with Ananda, just one post. And then I reached out to my friend Keshava in Ananda Palo Alto, who was doing talks on Whispers. And I kept getting this feeling like I feel Master, not I want to, but I feel Master really wants me to do something with this. And then I just had the thought, I feel like, I want to do a retreat, and I feel like there is a workbook within me that I can do, because I'm tuning into the introduction very deeply, and I don't feel it's me doing it, because Sanjan is not a great book study. You know, he's not. I didn't grow up reading ravenously books because I love them. I know many people that do, but I didn't. But I always was touched by Master's teachings, but I never had that call with Whispers. And so it was I really felt Master wanted me to share that. And then I was speaking with Nirmala and Dharmadas, and I shared with them, that I felt to do a retreat. And Nirmala said, why don't you just do it? It doesn't have to be perfect, because I was kind of waiting for it to be in a better, to be more formed. And this kind of opening in the sky came up as we were talking about it. And she said, look, that's a sign from the divine. And I knew I'd wanted to do something. And when I kept reading the beginning parts of Whispers, I didn't read the whole introduction. I read just the keys to demand and hints to the reader just about how to pray effectively. And then I felt like it would be wonderful in retreat. This is what I'd felt about retreat, was to share Whispers out loud and together as a group, that we work with it like we work like a meditation, but as a group. And then I went back to the beginning on page 15, there in parentheses. Master said just before the parentheses, you can read it mentally again, with deep concentration mentally in parentheses, or out loud in congregations. And it was just like this confirmation that Master wants me to do something with this. And now I'm not to go, I could speak a lot about it and I'm not going to, but now I've started to, I have an opportunity to share whispers outside of Ananda, which is something I feel guided to do. And I've had a conversation with Jyotish and Devi about, and they were very supportive of that and of creating a workbook. And so it's starting to take shape, and I still don't know how it's going to go, but I'm following that inner call. What is being called to you? What is Master, what is God asking you to do? Now, I'm doing it around the work. I don't naturally feel comfortable in front of a camera or teaching people, but I've always been put in that situation. You know, when I was in Madison, Wisconsin, I just wanted to go to a meditation group and an Ananda meditation group and receive, you know, the wisdom of Kriyabans about this path, but no one wanted to do it. And I felt I had to be around the work. So I started to teach meditation and share, and after a year built a group, you know, magnetized a group as I deepened in my discipleship. It's not something I wanted to do at all. I really didn't want to. And so sometimes we'll be asked to do things that we aren't comfortable doing. Sometimes we are, but maybe also it's not anything to do with the work as such. Maybe it is to do with relationships, families, work. What is Master asking you to do with habits, etc.? I'm taking part in the Raja Yoga course that's taking place here in Ananda, Sacramento. And there's part of me that, you know, I'm studying the new path. You know, Kriya Satsangs, we're studying A Hope for a Better World by Swami Kriyananda. There's Raja Yoga, and I'm doing this continual study of whispers. And part of me just wants to grab one thing and dive deeply into it. But also Master's kind of giving me this opportunity to do it. And Raja is really helping me to focus and get grounded again in the yamas and the niyamas and other aspects. And it's something I've really wanted to dive into, but it was really by chance that I started to dive into it. And I felt Master's guiding me to do that. What are you being guided to do? What are you being guided to do with regards to your meditations, with your habits? What are you being guided to do with, you know, your service? It might be, maybe you've got some creative ideas, and it doesn't have to be in front of a camera or sharing with people. Maybe it is, but maybe it's some other way. Maybe you have some inspiring way to connect with other devotees and people in need that need uplifting. It's just tuning into that for ourselves. So I won't say much, but continue this week to ask God what he and Guru, what he's asking of you at this time, and be willing to follow that, even though you don't necessarily know where it's going to go. If you really feel that, and sometimes if you're newer at doing this, it's worth checking in with, you know, a minister, a spiritual friend who is much more deeply attuned and has a sense of things, you know, so don't necessarily always blindly follow that. But I think if you're watching this book study, you have a depth already, but I do put that caution in there. And then the other aspect that I really wanted to dive into was that the tests that came. God's true lovers seem to attract more than their share of trials. Perhaps the reason is to give the rest of us a lesson from their example, that adversity, if met with divine faith, proves invariably a blessing in the end. Of course, we know that Swami Kriyananda, Donald Walters, is is beginning his journey with Master. When we do finally get to chapter 18, he arrives in Mount Washington, hence this chapter to really share about how Mount Washington was created and the mission of Master. But he's beginning his journey at Self-Realization Fellowship. By the end of the book, we see that he gets dismissed. But there, Swami, in those last couple of chapters, says very plainly, even though it was very traumatic, these are my words, that it was very challenging, traumatic, but his words, that it actually became the greatest blessing of his life that this had happened. And of course, when he had that test, and the great saint who was had a very intimate, a very deep relationship with Swami, because Swami had the ability, Swami Kriyananda had the ability to come and really just take the nectar of Anandamoya Ma's divine vibration and wisdom from her. And so she had a very deep connection with him, and she said to him after this happened, take it as a sign of your guru's grace. And Swami just couldn't even begin to fathom that this was anywhere near true. And so he really was challenged with this. And as I've already mentioned before, there's the chapter that we'll come across. One of my most read chapters is a divine test. And so throughout this book, we're going to see when people get tested and tested, whether it's Swami, other devotees, whether it's Master, and Master getting tested again and again. Here, he's getting tested by the temple going into the ocean, and everyone being dismayed by it, but him strong as ever in God, and just what is God asking me to do now? And as you know, many of you know, I've gone through a series of long time testing, and I'm really beginning to come out of it in a very, I feel my energy is back. I'm only just recently back to 108 Kriyas twice a day, and the higher Kriyas, everything all together. It's taken me a long time to come back to that point. I was deeply tested during this time, and depth was important to me, and there was times when I fell from my meditation. I'm not proud to say that, but that's where I was. That was the test that I went through, but I held on and had faith. And so even though at times it didn't feel like I had faith, I held on because I knew there was something at the other end, and that has been the case. We have to just keep going with our tests and to see that they are a blessing. And I have to tell you this, that I wouldn't swap it. I've changed how I feel about it. I feel incredibly grateful because it's opened my heart very deeply and in a way that I've never experienced before. When I was just recently doing an interview with my good friend Jitendra this past week for Whispers from Eternity, I had said that Whispers had changed everything for me. What I really meant from that was just that it had changed my heart. It hadn't changed everything around me in my life. Life still felt very challenging, but it had changed my heart and my love for God, and that I could feel God, and I can, like right now, I feel God just very deeply with me. And so in that sense, I wouldn't change it because other people were involved. I can't quite fully, feel that it was the best tests. It was something that I could just say yes. I'm so pleased that happened. But even for them, I know that they have been changing themselves. So ultimately it is such a blessing. And so if we can get to that point, and so this week, as we started a couple minutes late, let's just close the eyes and let's take this into the week, because we can't dive into it too deeply, but really examine the tests that you've had or that you are going through right now. And just see what Master is teaching you, what he's asking you to learn, and what are the blessings of this test. Maybe you don't feel the blessings right now, but you can pray to God to help you to see the blessings. And if you've been tested greatly, to really let go of that, to really move on from that, we have to tune into the blessings of those tests and be grateful for them. And we also have to stand strong and be ready that those tests may come again. If we didn't handle them well, they may come again, but certainly other tests will come. And so what do I need to continue to grow in and change within myself, so that if those tests come again, I will be able to face them with more faith, more a sense of joy and depth, even if outwardly it is bleak and challenging. So let's just ask Master now for the last minute, help us with our tests and seeing the blessings. Okay, great souls. So homework for this week, if you choose to accept your mission, should you choose to accept it, is diving into, tuning into the divine will. So what's God asking you to do right now in meditation, in prayer, in journaling, introspection, in your everyday life, asking what is God's will of you, tuning in to the tests that you are receiving right now, if any. I think we're all receiving tests right now with the planet in lockdown. What tests, what big tests you've had before, and is there any more letting go that you need to do? Any more, what's the wisdom, what's the blessing from it? So we'll end chapter 17 next week. It's on page 180. It's the second paragraph on page 180. We begin within a year and 2 months of the loss of Encinitas is where it starts, that second paragraph. And we'll end the chapter, I promise, next week. God bless. Thank you for bearing with me for the late start. Bye-bye.